The Galactic Refugee Commission had processed 412 species in its 300-year history. It had never processed humans before. This was not an oversight. It was not bureaucratic negligence. It was simply that humans had never needed to be processed because humans had always had Earth. And Earth had always been there, a small blue planet in an unremarkable system that the galaxy had mostly ignored because it was out of the way, and its inhabitants were, by galactic standards, young and loud and occasionally alarming in ways that suggested getting involved with them was likely to be more complicated than it was worth. Earth was gone now, not destroyed. Gone was the precise word, a word that meant something specific in the Galactic Refugee Commission's processing vocabulary, something different from destroyed or conquered or abandoned. Gone meant the planet still existed but was no longer habitable, no longer home, no longer the thing it had been. Gone meant the people who had lived there were now in the galaxy, without the thing that had defined them, carrying everything they were in whatever ships they had managed to reach in time. Commissioner Veth had processed 412 species. She had never seen anything like the humans. The first thing she noticed was the ships, not the number, though the number was significant. A convoy that stretched across her station's sensor range in a way that suggested the evacuation had been better organized than most species managed under the circumstances. What she noticed was the condition of the ships. They were damaged. Not one or two, all of them to varying degrees in ways that told the story of what had happened without requiring any verbal account. Some had hull damage consistent with weapons fire. Some had stress fractures from rapid atmospheric exit. Some showed signs of repairs that had been made in transit. Rough, functional, the kind of repairs that people made when they had to, and had what was available and could not wait for proper facilities. The repairs were what stayed with her. Every species she had ever processed, when evacuating under crisis conditions, prioritized survival. They got out, they ran. They did what was necessary to reach safety, and they dealt with the damage later at the processing station, where proper facilities existed. The humans had fixed their ships while fleeing, not all the damage. There was not time for all the damage. But the critical failures, the things that would have prevented ships from completing the journey, those had been addressed, jury-rigged, patched with whatever was available, in ways that her engineering consultants later told her were either inspired or insane, and were in several cases both, simultaneously. She had been processing refugees. For 40 years, she had never seen a refugee convoy arrive in better functional condition than it had been in when it departed the crisis. The humans had fled a dying planet and arrived, damaged and exhausted and carrying everything they owned, having fixed their ships on the way. She filed it as an observation and moved on to the intake process. She would come back to it many times. The intake process for a species of humanity's size took, under normal circumstances, approximately 6 months. Documentation, health assessment, cultural inventory, skills assessment, placement evaluation, the careful machinery of an organization that had learned, over 300 years, that refugee processing done badly produced problems that lasted generations, and that doing it well required time and attention that felt slow in the moment and saved enormous difficulty later. The humans were through intake in 11 weeks. This was not because the commission rushed them. It was because the humans had arrived with their documentation already prepared. Not all of it. Some records had been lost in the evacuation. Some systems had failed to complete the backup processes in time, and there were gaps that the commission staff had to work around. But the core documentation, population records, skills inventories, cultural archives, medical histories, educational records, had been prepared in advance. Packaged, organized, formatted to galactic standard specifications. Commissioner Veth called the human liaison into her office on day 3 to ask about this directly. The liaison was a woman named Dr. Seren Okafor, 40 years old, with the particular quality of focus that Veth had come to associate with humans generally, a quality of being entirely present in whatever situation she was in, as if her full attention was available, and she was choosing to deploy it here. Now on this specific thing, the documentation, Veth said, it was prepared in advance. Yes, Okafor said, before the evacuation. We started preparing it about 20 years ago. Okafor said. When the first projection suggested the solar event might be more severe than initially modeled, Beth looked at her. 20 years ago, the projections were early stage. Most species in that situation would have hoped they were wrong, Okafor said. Yes, we hoped they were wrong. We also prepared for the possibility that they were right. She paused. We have a history of hoping things are wrong while preparing for the possibility they are right. It has served us reasonably well. You prepared evacuation documentation 20 years before the evacuation, Beth said slowly. We prepared evacuation documentation, evacuation routes, evacuation ships, evacuation protocols, designated reception points, skills inventories for integration into receiving communities, cultural preservation archives, and a 17-volume assessment of which galactic civilizations would be most compatible with human settlement based on resource availability, cultural compatibility metrics, and existing diplomatic relationships. Okafor paused. The 17 volumes took about 6 years. There was significant argument about the methodology. Beth stared at her. You are describing, she said carefully, a species that spent 20 years preparing to lose their home planet. We spent 20 years hoping we wouldn't have to use the preparation, Okafor said. We used it anyway. She paused. We are very good at preparation. We have had a great deal of practice at preparing for things we hope won't happen. The skills assessment produced results that Veth's team spent 3 weeks arguing about before submitting, because the results were outside normal parameters in ways that made them look like errors until you checked them 3 times and confirmed they were not. Humans, as a species, had an unusual relationship with specialization. Every other species the Commission had processed had populations distributed across skill sets in predictable ways. There were specialists and generalists, and the specialists vastly outnumbered the generalists, because specialization was more efficient, and civilizations that optimized for efficiency produced specialists. This was true across every civilization in the galactic database without exception. Humanity's distribution was different. The specialists existed. Humanity had specialists in every field, and their specialists were among the best the Commission's assessors had encountered. But the generalist population was, by every metric the assessors used, anomalously large. And the generalists were not generalists in the sense of knowing a little about many things. They were generalists in the sense of knowing a significant amount about many things. People who had multiple deep competencies across fields that, in other species, were considered entirely separate disciplines. The assessors had a word for this in their internal reports. They called it adaptive redundancy, the quality of a population where the failure of any specialist class could be compensated for by people who were not specialists, but were capable enough to function until specialists could be trained or found. The Commission had a metric for civilizational resilience that measured, among other things, how well a species could function after catastrophic loss of population and infrastructure. The metric had a theoretical maximum that no species had ever reached, because the theoretical maximum assumed a level of adaptive redundancy that the Commission's designers had considered impossible in practice. Humanity's score was 87% of the theoretical maximum. The previous highest score in Commission history was 41%. Veth's lead assessor came to her office personally to deliver this result, which was something he had never done in 20 years of assessments. He placed the report on her desk and stood there until she looked up. I checked it 4 times, he said. It's accurate. She read it again. 87%, she said. Yes, the previous record was 41. Yes, how, she said. He sat down. I've been thinking about that, he said. The short answer is that they don't separate knowledge from practice the way other species do. In most civilizations, you learn a thing and then you do that thing. Specialists learn one thing very well and do it. Generalists learn many things shallowly and do whichever is needed. He paused. Humans learn things and then keep learning adjacent things. Not because they need to professionally, often for reasons that have nothing to do with professional utility. Curiosity, interest, the enjoyment of understanding how something works. He looked at her. Their educational philosophy has a concept that translates roughly as learning for its own sake. It is not considered a luxury or a hobby. It is considered fundamental to what they are. Veth looked at the report for a long time. They prepared for 20 years, she said slowly. They fixed their ships while fleeing. They arrived with documentation formatted to our specifications, and their population has an adaptive redundancy score of 87%. She paused. This is not a species in crisis. This is a species that is very good at crisis. Yes, her assessor said. That is exactly what it is. The placement evaluation was where things became genuinely complicated. Placement evaluation determined where a refugee population would be settled, which systems, which planets, which communities. It was the most politically sensitive part of the process, because it required negotiating with receiving civilizations about populations they were being asked to absorb, and receiving civilizations had interests and concerns and preferences that had to be balanced against the refugees' needs and the Commission's mandate. For most species, the process was straightforward. The Commission had a database of receiving communities with available resources and compatible requirements. You matched population to community based on skills, cultural factors, resource needs. Sometimes there were complications. Usually it resolved within a few weeks. The human placement evaluation produced, within 48 hours, 17 separate requests from receiving civilizations that had been following the intake process, not requests to take a portion of the human population. Requests to take all of them. Beth read the first request with mild surprise, the second with more attention. By the fifth, she had called an emergency meeting of her senior staff. The requests were not humanitarian. They were strategic. Every receiving civilization that had submitted a request had done the same analysis and reached the same conclusion. A population with humanity's adaptive redundancy score, their documentation preparation capacity, their skills distribution, and their demonstrated ability to maintain functional capability under catastrophic stress was not a refugee population that needed to be helped. It was a resource that every civilization in range was suddenly very interested in acquiring. They want us to decide which civilization gets the humans, her deputy said. That's what this is. Yes, Beth said. That's not how placement works. No, Beth said. It's not. She looked at the 17 requests. But I don't think the humans are going to be placed the way placement normally works. She paused. I think we need to ask them where they want to go. The meeting with the Human Leadership Council was unlike any meeting Beth had conducted in 40 years of refugee processing. There were 12 of them. They represented different areas of expertise: science, engineering, medicine, diplomacy, culture, education, security. They had been elected by the broader population during the 11 weeks of intake, which meant that while Beth had been processing their documentation, they had been organizing their own governance structure from scratch. She had never had a refugee population organize its own governance structure during intake before. She had also never had a refugee population that had, before she could present the placement options, already reviewed the 17 requests, analyzed the receiving civilization's resources and needs, and prepared a counter-proposal. Okafor presented it with the same quality of focused attention she brought to everything. We have reviewed the requests, she said. We understand what each receiving civilization is looking for. We also have our own assessment of where settlement would be most viable long-term. She placed a document on the table. This is our proposal. We are not asking to be placed in one location. We are asking to be distributed, specific populations to specific communities based on matching our capabilities to their needs and their resources to our requirements. She looked at Beth. We have done this analysis before. We are reasonably good at it. Beth looked at the document. It was thorough. More thorough than most placement proposals her own staff produced. It had accounted for variables she would not have expected a population in crisis to have the bandwidth to consider: long-term resource sustainability, cultural integration timelines, second-generation adaptation metrics. You prepared this during intake, she said. We prepared the framework before leaving Earth, Okafor said. We filled in the specifics once we had the Commission's data on the receiving civilizations. She paused. We had hoped to have more time to refine it. 11 weeks was adequate. Beth looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked up at the 12 people across the table from her, exhausted, displaced, carrying the weight of a species that had just lost its home planet, and somehow still doing this. Still preparing. still analyzing, still producing competent work under conditions that would have paralyzed most species entirely. I have processed 412 species, she said slowly, in 40 years. I have never, she stopped. Started again? What happened to Earth? How long did the final event take? A woman at the end of the table, older than the others, answered, 43 hours from the point of no return to uninhabitable. And in 43 hours you evacuated. Not everyone, the woman said. Her voice was steady. We evacuated everyone we could reach. Not everyone, she paused. We are still accounting for the final numbers. The room was quiet. Beth looked at the document, at the 12 people, at 43 years of her work and the 412 species she had processed and the thousands of individual human faces she had seen in 48 hours of walking through the intake. Areas and tired, grieving, carrying children and photographs and small objects that mattered, and still somehow functional, still somehow organized, still somehow prepared. Your proposal, she said finally. It accounts for the long-term needs of the receiving civilizations as well as your own. Yes, Okafor said. You are negotiating on behalf of the civilizations receiving you as well as your own population. We thought it would produce better long-term outcomes for everyone, Okafor said simply, which would produce better long-term outcomes for us. We have found historically that those two things tend to be the same. Veth was quiet for a moment. I'm going to approve your proposal, she said. With minor modifications, she paused. I am also going to recommend to the Commission that humanity's case be entered into our training archive as a reference model. Okafor looked at her carefully. For what? For how a species responds to losing everything, Veth said. And what it looks like when they do it well, she paused. We have had 412 cases. I have never had one I wanted other species to study. She looked at the document. I want them to study this one. Humanity was placed over the following 8 months, not in one location, not in 17, in a distribution that followed the proposal Okafor had presented, modified by Veth's experience and the Commission's resources and the negotiations that followed. Negotiations that the Human Council conducted with a competence that the receiving civilizations' representatives found alternately impressive and unsettling, because they had come expecting to negotiate with desperate refugees and had found themselves negotiating with people who had done their homework more thoroughly than they had. The final distribution placed human communities in 31 different systems across 9 civilizations. Within 2 years, all 31 communities had achieved functional integration. This was 3 times faster than the Commission's standard timeline. Within 5 years, 7 of the receiving civilizations had filed formal reports noting that their human communities had made contributions to local infrastructure, medicine, engineering, or governance that had produced outcomes beyond what the receiving civilization had projected when agreeing to the placement. Within 10 years, the Commission received its first formal request from one of the receiving civilizations, asking whether additional human communities could be placed within their territory. Then a second request. Then 14 more. Veth was retired by then. She had left the Commission after 30 years, 3 years after the human placement, and had taken up a quiet life on a station near the outer rim where the light from several young stars made the evenings worth sitting outside for. She received a message from Okafor on the 10th anniversary. It contained the statistics, the integration timelines, the infrastructure contributions, the 14 requests. At the bottom was a single line, we are still preparing. We thought you would want to know. Beth read it twice. Then she went outside and watched the young stars for a long time, thinking about a species that had lost its home planet and spent the journey to safety, fixing its ships, and about what 43 hours and 11 weeks and 10 years looked like, when a species decided, not in a moment of inspiration but as a deep and practiced habit, to prepare for whatever came next. She thought it was, possibly, the most human thing she had ever encountered, which was saying something. Because in 40 years of processing 413 species, she had encountered quite a lot of human things. None of them had surprised her quite like that one. Title: Every species that lost their home collapsed. Humans lost Earth and arrived already prepared. HFY thumbnail prompt. New formula. a dramatic cinematic YouTube thumbnail. Left side, extreme close-up of a shocked alien female commissioner face, large eyes wide in complete disbelief, holding a holographic document showing 87% resilience score. Expression of someone who has processed 412 species and never seen anything like this. Right side, extreme close-up of a calm, determined human female diplomat face, slight confident smile, dark focused eyes, holding a prepared document, expression of someone who came ready. Behind alien side, dark space showing destroyed Earth glowing red in background, refugee ships everywhere. Behind human side, warm golden light, organized fleet of repaired human ships in perfect formation, already moving forward. Dark dramatic background, ultra-realistic cinematic 4K movie poster quality. Bold white capital text at top. We came prepared. Widescreen 16.9 format. No watermarks,